Hello and welcome to Sami Parvez Show. Today I'm joined by Andy Coleman, the president of Christian Emergency Alliance. We will be discussing about the rise of burning churches in Canada and the Western world, and also the rise of Christianophobia. Last week, a church was burned down in Toronto, and since 2021, where hundreds of churches were vandalized, burned down, set on fire. Thank you so much, Andy, for joining me today. And it's a pleasure, sir, to have you here.
Well, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be with you.
My pleasure, sir. Thank you so much. So, as you know, what's going on in Canada and across the world with respect to Christianity, the churches are being burned down, vandalized, and there is also a cancel culture. So how do you see this one?
Yeah, it is happening in many different countries. I see it as a pattern at play, and I don't know that it is a pattern playing out in many countries. And I don't know, as a Christian community, as a global church, we've really picked up on it very well. These churches have been torched and burned under suspicious circumstances in Canada now since 2021. But we're also seeing the same pattern happening in places like Nigeria. This is happening in France. It's happening across Europe. And yeah, there's anti-Christian sentiment on the rise. And I think it's important for us as Christians to be aware of that. It's not something that the mainstream media outlets are going to care much about. And so be it. We live in the world, the real world. And even if major media doesn't care, that doesn't mean that the church can't care. We must care. We must find ways of tracking these types of developments, praying for one another, helping one another, and standing with one another when we're having troubles.
Yeah. So it is very difficult to watch the scenes where churches are being burned down, though like they are century old. You cannot build up like those churches again. Those are part of the history.
Yeah.
Though if you are not a Christian, but it means those, so they are part of your history. Like what when you find something in museum, so it is very old antique piece, and these churches are you can say those are antique piece. So do you consider Christianity is under attack?
Oh, absolutely. And that's, in fact, why I have carried out the ministry that I've been a part of now for so many years. For many years, I was working really focused on the Middle East and helping Christianity in the Middle East. It's why I today serve with the Christian Emergency Alliance, helping Christians in countries where you typically hear of more persecution, like the Middle East, like North Africa, like parts of Asia. But increasingly, this is happening in the West. This is absolutely a physical attack on the church. It's also a spiritual attack on the church. It is difficult to watch. And, maybe it's true in some of these areas, like these old ancient churches, the church that some of the churches that recently burned in Canada, they're older churches, but we've also seen ancient churches in Europe go down in flames under suspicious circumstances. And it's very hard to watch. But I hope that it prompts people to examine their hearts, their attitudes, what they're doing. And because I'm reminded that we have a Messiah, Jesus Christ, who rose from the dead. Our story in Christianity is a story of redemption and truth. And from these ashes, good things can arise, but we have to lean into him. We have to trust him. And we have to stand and just decide, are we going to faithfully follow Jesus Christ? Or are we going to go with the culture? Are we going to be cowed by the culture? Or can we engage? So I hope that even if some of these churches that are burning, maybe they're difficult to replace and rebuild, my prayer is that those communities would decide to do so, even if it's hard, even if it's not as perfect as it once was. It's helpful for us to relearn our Christian history, because we'll discover that some of the churches we prize today like the ancient churches in Jerusalem, some of those were burned
Mhm.
1,000 years ago, and
Yeah.
they were rebuilt, and we're still grateful that they were there. So I
Mhm.
hope that we as Christians can develop a grit, a resilience, and a toughness, a spiritual toughness that we need if we're going to stand faithfully for Christ in the public square.
Mhm. Yeah. So do you think a government should play a role for saving churches? Though, uh, please let me to elaborate. Like
Mhm.
we can see when a mosque or synagogue get attacked, it is being called out Islamophobia or anti-Semitism. So
Mhm.
so why when a church got burnt, but we cannot say it is Christianophobia? So don't you think a government should play a role to call it out? This is Christianophobia.
Well, absolutely. I think governments have a responsibility to protect their citizens and to protect the property in their countries. Absolutely. What we're seeing is that popular narratives have shifted to the point where it paints Christians with a brush that is false. There's a lot, our societies are awash in lies today.
Mhm.
And a lot of normal people are seeing that, I believe. They're sensing that something's off from what they're being told and what they're actually seeing with their own eyes. And I hope it prompts them to really examine what they're being told and what is really true, and that we need to commit ourselves to live not by lies, but by truth. But yes, governments do have this responsibility, and I would call upon governments to protect these properties and these lives. And at the risk of some people painting me perhaps as an alarmist, I don't think I am, but back when things were in the 1930s and the early 1940s, when things were ginning up for World War II, and all these ugly things were happening in Germany,
Mhm.
somebody commented, I can't recall who, but they were burning books, they were burning all of this material from the Jewish population, and somebody observed that if wherever they're willing to burn books, they're willing to burn people. And as a Christian, I would go out there and venture wherever they're willing to burn churches, they will one day be willing to burn people.
Mhm.
So we need to step in now. Um, Unfortunately, I think some Christians have bought into the narrative, the false narrative, this odds, almost socially. Uh, it's a cultural socialism that
Mhm.
has crept in that says, well, no, there's these camps and they're the powerful by definition, and then there's these other camps of people and they're the powerless. So whoever's who, that's they're already labeled, that we can identify them as a group. And Christians have been put in that camp that they must be the powerful, so they must be oppressors. So if there's harm coming to them, well, maybe it's deserved. And that is absolute poison. Those are lies from the devil. And I pray that Christians who they may have given some credence to it. Maybe they thought, oh, maybe there's something to that. Maybe I should just keep quiet and not say anything. Maybe I just need to keep my head down. I hope people come to their senses, and I hope they just prayerfully examine how they're living their lives, and they come to that realization that enough. This is enough.
Mhm.
I'm going to stand up. We're not being oppressors. In fact, we're being oppressed. We haven't done anything wrong to warrant this. And I just hope that they can find some Christian courage and confidence for the days coming ahead, because we will need it.
Mhm. So where do you see the young generation in Christianity? Are they following up following in their parents or forefathers footsteps, or are they just changing their way to being anti-Christians or being atheist? So how
Mhm.
how do you see the young generation?
I think it's a mixed bag. I think a lot of churches have unfortunately not done the best job of discipling younger generations. I think many churches wanted to attract crowds. They wanted to find pragmatic ways to just get people in the doors, maybe help them be entertained, have a good time, be very comfortable, not be stretch or strain, but just come together and be a part of this fellowship. Discipleship did not always rise to the level it needed to. Just teaching people, teaching young kids the Bible, teaching them why we believe what we believe. But what I sense from younger people is there are many that are just drifting away. If all we're going to teach in our churches is essentially therapeutic moral deism, how to be a better friend, how do I feel better about my feelings, how do I get along well with people, that's stuff that people can learn at civic clubs. That's what people can learn in any kind of group setting. But we need to follow Christ. We need to follow the gospel. And when we do that, we discover there's this richness, there's this beauty, there's this truth, there's this purpose that comes into our lives, that we get to play a part of this story that has been unfolding for thousands of years. And we can stand on the side of goodness and righteousness. We can advance a kingdom. We can see lives transformed. We can play a part of this. And so when I see younger generations, I sense that there might be a gap. Maybe people in their 30s and 40s, maybe they're wrestling more, but with your 20s, I think a lot of them are thirsty for truth. I think a lot of them are scrambling for answers. They understand that there's things wrong in the world and they can't exactly put their fingers on it, but they want the truth. And I think many of them would rather be in a discipleship setting where they're told the truth. And it's not just about feeling good about ourselves, our emotional IQs, but really learning truth. So that's the good news. And I think that those that have that thirst and that hunger, I think more and more people are speaking up, trying to speak into that and provide resource and training opportunities and discipleship opportunities, and giving these young people this purpose and this drive and this passion for Christ. And so I do see that happening, but it's breaking both ways. When I was working a lot in the Middle East during the Arab Spring, I noticed that, these were Muslim majority countries, and there was some horrible things during the Arab Spring. That was the rise of ISIS and all of that. ISIS would cut these horrible videos where they were butchering people, lighting people on fire, and they were always doing it by citing Quranic verses or the Hadith.
Yeah.
And so just normal Muslims on the street would watch this, and they would really be challenged, and they would wrestle. And some would see that and be like, wow, that they're saying all this stuff that I was supposed to be believing. And okay, if that's what Islam is, then I guess I need to follow it. And if not, what's true? They're going back to the question of the young people, like, what is true?
Yep.
And many came to hear about the gospel of Jesus Christ for the first time in their community for 1,000 years. And a lot of people ended up coming to Christ in that area, but it broke both ways. It was like in the scriptures, it talks about how Jesus doesn't want us lukewarm. He wants us hot or cold, either follow him or fall away and follow the false. And so that's what I saw in the Middle East. And in a similar way, I see that same pattern playing out here in Western nations.
Yeah, so as you brought up, like what's happening in like Middle East, like there is a you can see it means that is a majority Muslim country. The rise of Islamist groups or terrorist groups like ISIS or Taliban or Al Qaeda and other groups like in Afghanistan. In Nigeria, there are other terrorist groups which works under, they say we are working under Sharia law,
Right.
but those are false. And I know, like being a Muslim, to understand what Quran says, though it says that it means those if those are Christian, Jews, or it means you are a Muslim, so it means you can marry with them, you can eat their slaughtered animals and food, like if there would be something different, so Quran would not say that, but they don't share the factual things with regarding Christians or Jews or other religious groups. They will take what they will advantage on their perspective. But we can see, maybe you heard like last week or 2 weeks ago, in Pakistan, a Muslim, no, Christian community was under attack. I don't know, they just call him, he may say something against a prophet or something like that, but maybe they were wrong. They just wanted to attack him, and his house was burned down. Is like factory, he has a small business that was burned down. Everything, they that was
Mhm.
attacked, and it did not happen for the first time. It has been happening in
Yeah.
Pakistan and other Muslim majority countries, as you are working with them.
Yeah.
You know better. So we know, like, they are, these terrorist groups would attack these churches and other minority group. But what we are seeing in North America, especially in Canada, like, at least 34 churches, according to CBC, in 20 since 2021. But currently, still, that report was from January, beginning of
Mhm.
this year. But right now, last week, we saw a church was burned, but still police did not confirm it. It was arson, or maybe it was uh, just fire, something like that. It burned out. But
Mhm.
who do you think are behind of burning these churches in Western world?
Well, it's once again, it's a mixed bag. In Canada, I do think that maybe some of the churches that were burned, maybe they were electrical fires.
Mm-hmm.
It's important to wait for the facts on these, but the pattern of just the wave of arson attacks and vandalism that have been confirmed, even though very few arrests are ever made, that is very clear that that's going on. I think in Canada, the majority of those attacks are being carried out by left-wing
Mm-hmm.
political activists. They bought into what really amounted to a hoax back in 2021,
Yep.
where there was a report that they had used a type of technology to see under the ground, and
Mm-hmm.
they discovered these mass graves of indigenous children, and that there was 200, 300 kids buried, which was evidence of systemic racism. And that narrative just hits. Even Prime Minister Trudeau jumped on that bandwagon. Everybody said that it was understandable to see this violence and outrage. And
Mm-hmm.
even though some of the politicians may not have condoned the violence, they said that they were sympathetic to it and understood the roots of the rage and all this, and it just swept up. So I think in those areas you see a lot of left-wing activists. Um, in Europe, you might have some of that going on as well.
Mm-hmm.
You do have some political activity perhaps linked to that, but I think in Europe, it may be that it may be more with some of the Muslim immigrants that
Mm-hmm.
have come in. Again, it's tough. We're trying to trace the patterns of this activity, but I'll say this as well, whether it's a radical Islamic group or a radical left-wing communist group, behind it all is our spiritual enemy. Behind all of it is
Mm-hmm.
Satan. Um, I think that's another thing that's going to be important for Christians to realize as they observe these attacks, especially if they bought into a materialist mindset that really all that exists in the world around us is wood, is furniture, is buildings, is concrete. We live in a charged spiritual world,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a spiritual battle taking place. We have a purpose in all of that, but we also need to remind ourselves that that enemy is behind these attacks. And I think that's very important because we as Christians need to be able to confront these challenges. We need to be able to protect ourselves, protect one another, protect our properties. But at the same time, we can't allow ourselves to crater to hatred. Um, we have to know that Satan is behind this, and we still, as the Bible teaches us, need to love our enemies, even if we have to confront them and defend one another.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, you are absolutely right. And just I need to jump in, share some data. So it means that report I was talking, that report says 20 were confirmed erosions and two were ruled out accidental dozen. This I'm talking about CBC News reported back in January 2024 this year. So it says also dozen of churches have been vandalized, as you mentioned, like since like 215 remains or graves were found in Kamloops Beach, British Columbia, back in 2021. But since then, after 3 years, they did not find anything, despite like spending 8 million taxpayer dollars.
Right.
So it
Yeah.
means they could not find it, but maybe they just used it as a mechanism or a
Yeah.
reason to attack the churches. And since
Yeah.
and as you were mentioning Prime Minister Trudeau, I'm going to quote Pastor Steve Long. So according to International Prayer Connect, they reported that Pastor Steve Long said he met Prime Minister Trudeau 3 times, and the third time Trudeau told him Christians were the worst part of Canadian society. Yeah, I don't know you heard this one or not, but I learned it. I read it from somewhere. These were words quoted from there. And what's your reaction?
Well, I hadn't heard that. I'm sorry to hear that he believes that, but I do believe that popular sentiments, including popular sentiments in the Canadian government and in other governments, or at least by some significant margins, are anti-Christian. They are opposed to the Christian message. They're opposed to truth, biblical truth. They've really bought into more of a postmodern ethos. And so whatever, it's all relativistic. And we want to get behind kind of popular left-wing initiatives, many of which run counter to biblical values and biblical norms. So if that's the dominant worldview that they're operating from, I suppose I'm not shocked by that. You mentioned the CBC and their reports from early this year about the number of churches. I think that those figures are really, really low.
Yep.
Those are very conservative estimates. Most of the reports that we see are several hundreds of churches have gone down.
Yeah.
And really, I think that the CBC has revealed itself. You know, there's been a lot of revelation, especially since 2020 and the whole COVID lockdowns. You in Canada have had so many abuses and headaches and trials between the trucker freedom convoy, between the church lockdowns, and we in the United States have had problems as well. But seeing what's gone on in Canada has really been stunning. But yeah, I think that the CBC, the state media up there, is essentially an extension of the government. So you really don't have any speed breaks up there.
Yeah.
You don't really have any limitations on what's designed to be a limited power of government. It's really become, there's an authoritarian impulse that's pulsing around the Western world. That authoritarian impulse is alive and well and strong in Canada. And I think it's surprised some Christians that have paid attention, but too many Christians around the world haven't. And so for any of your listeners, I would just say, you know, if you're in Canada, we need to be praying for one another. We can't buy into if that's the majority of worldview, this post-relativistic thing. We need to examine what we believe in our hearts, live it out in the actions of our lives, and be willing to use our voices to stand up for one another and just to stand up for what's good and right and true. And I hope that any of your listeners that are not in Canada, I pray that they're praying for the church in Canada, just praying for the Canadian government, praying for Trudeau. But that's an important message I want to emphasize. Christians need to be praying for one another, championing one another, not muzzling ourselves, but just standing up. Yep. Standing up, recognizing, rebuilding, living, showing love and grace, but also being very clear with who we are, what we believe. And if others wrinkle their noses at us or write us off or dismiss us, so be it. But we're called to live out a costly faith, and it's going to be costlier in the days ahead. So be it. We're in it together. We can do it.
Yeah, thank you. So Oh. So, what we are seeing in Canada, do you see the same pattern in US? Because I did not hear any churches were burned down in US.
Yeah, so great question. And yeah, I do see parallels. So when you see these types of developments, and maybe it's just because of the work that I've been able to, the ministry work I've been able to be a part of in many countries, I just get the opportunity to see patterns. I'm like, wow, that looks familiar. So you have your church burnings in Canada. You did have church arson attacks in the United States, and especially against Christian pro-life centers.
Mhm.
And that happened after the Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe v. Wade.
Yeah, yeah.
Again, a lot of left-wing activists took to the streets and they targeted Christian institutions. Some were churches, some were pregnancy resource centers that were
Mhm.
operated by Christians and all of this. So yeah, it's the same playbook. We're going to go and we're going to attack these areas. We're going to paint them as villains and oppressors, and we're going to justify our actions. The ends justify the means.
Okay, thank you. So, so do you see a cancel culture is going on? Because mostly we see during Christmas, rather than saying Merry Christmas, they say Happy Holiday Season. But it seems like it did not happen much before. But last 4 and 5 years, I'm noticing this thing is keep going on. So how
Mm.
do you see this one? Do you think they will take over the Christianity? It means the Christianity will disappear? And how do you see this cancel culture? How much it is affecting Christianity?
Yeah, I do see it underway in different forms. Um, in some areas, I see a culture that's happy to retain some vestiges of Christian heritage without any of the Christian meaning. So by that I mean some areas might still be happy to put up a Christmas tree or something like that, but it's totally secular. They're just interested in presents and
Mm.
warm hot cocoa, those types of things. But I do see an effort to dislodge and displace Christian presence, in the public square. And this isn't new. This has been going on for a long time. This is why groups like the ACLU here in the United States has for decades sued small cities and towns so that they are not allowed to have a cross in the courthouse, or anything that smacks of like the Ten Commandments that had to be removed. All this stuff from our heritage. So it's not new, but you do see this odd amplification or acceleration of these developments. So one of the things that struck me recently was in Britain. Um, there were, in Britain where they're happy to put big LGBT flags covering and draping the streets. It was really, it was very muted at Easter. There
Mhm.
was plenty of signs, I don't think the LGBT flags were up then, but you had a whole lot of signs for Ramadan and
Mhm.
Happy Ramadan.
Yeah.
But really nothing too big about Easter. And in fact, in the United States on Easter Day, I believe the White House and the federal government was promoting like LGBT
Yeah.
inclusion day. And you're like, wait a minute, this is the holiest day on the Christian calendar, and you're doing what? So yeah, it is a bit of a cancel culture, if you will. Where I think you're going to see this in more pronounced fashions, though, is in the workplace.
Mhm.
I think you're going to see Christians who, again, try to live out faithfully their what they know to be true biblically in the workplace. That's not going to be tolerated. And so I believe we've already seen many Christians like Jack Phillips in Colorado who refused to. He was a professional baker and he refused to bake a cake for a gay wedding. And I think he's on his third or fourth wave of litigation where they just keep suing him and suing him and suing him and bleeding him of resources. They're trying to bleed him dry.
Mhm.
And so it's going to be an attempt to, when we're talking cancel culture, it's going to be an attempt to shut down Christian small businesses, force the firing of Christian employees. Um, and this is also a pattern that I saw a lot overseas too.
Mhm.
It's a good term for it might be smart persecution. because it's a little bit harder to detect and it doesn't generate splashy headlines, from like a church fire or anything like that. It's very quiet, and people can, if you eliminate a person's ability to provide for themselves, for their family, for their local church, that witness will dry up. And I think that program is well underway and is going to continue. And we as Christians need to be ready for it.
So how do you think, will they succeed?
They're going to have some success, but I think in the long run, they will not. I think people are a pretty savvy bunch. And I also have seen many times where the best laid plans of people that are hostile to Christianity, if you just look at the Bible, those that were opposed to God often looked like they were invincible and huge and everything was going their way and nothing could stop them. And yet we're reminded that we serve a God who turns the table on evil, and he's done it time and time again. The story of Esther goes to that. It looked like the entire Jewish race was going to be wiped out in the Persian Empire. Mm-hmm. And at the very end, they're miraculously saved. I do think that Christians can't take things for granted. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we at the Christian Emergency Alliance are very intentional about is trying to help Christians prepare and think through this ahead of time. What are some of the tactics that are going to be deployed against us? What are some counter tactics? What are some options we can do in our lives to prepare for that? Help ourselves, not just in the business place. How am I going to deal with these work issues? But how am I going to prepare my heart for when this hits me personally? And I just can't pretend it's going to affect others and never touch me. So we try to help them proactively think through those things, pray through those things, so that when it does hit them, they can respond biblically rather than just react emotionally. Mm-hmm. I try to be proactive because I know if I get reactive, maybe I won't respond biblically or in a way that I'm proud of. I'll be honest and say that there have been a couple of times where I've been cut off in traffic. And my immediate instinct, because I didn't see it coming, was to say something ugly or give an ugly gesture. But that's because it caught me off guard, and I have to repent of that. But if I can see that I'm about to get cut off, and I see that maybe they're in a rush, and I just tell myself maybe they're going to the hospital, maybe something's going really wrong in their life, I'm better prepared for that. And I think as Christians and just people who recognize that all is not well in culture, the more that we can do that, the more that we can help one another, the more that we can encourage one another, the better we're going to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Sorry, now I'm lost. I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, so right now we see like Democrats are ruling in US and liberals are ruling in Canada. Do you think is it because of a left-wing government, or would we see a different when a Republican will take over US and a conservative will take over Canada?
Well, as far as predicting what happens, that's difficult to do. I do think that if you have more conservative administrations come into office, and I believe it was yesterday, there was a whole lot of indications out of Europe that a lot of those countries were starting to abandon the hard left politics that has ushered in so many of these problems. So it will be interesting to see. But I do think that if you have more conservative governments come in, they will, in my estimation, they will be more open to allowing a Christian presence, tolerating a Christian presence in the public square. You won't see the same type of hostility that you currently do now. Again, we just need to know our history. People are sinners. We're prone to sin. My prayer is that more and more biblical Christians will excel at their crafts, excel in the workplace, excel as statesmen, and that you'll see more of a biblical influence in those countries. Because apart from Christ, I think everything descends into chaos. Even if you're talking to conservatives, you ask them, what is it you're trying to conserve? And you might get, well, liberty and freedom. And I just think you have to dig deeper. Well, where does that liberty and freedom come from? And I think that the liberty and freedom that has come to define what people think of the Western world for the last 2, 3 centuries, that was born out of a Christian ethos. It was Christian principles that allowed for that to grow and to flourish. But apart from that, if we're just going to live in these secular societies where all we do is look to man, that to me is idolatry. That's just idolizing man. That's putting man in in God's place, and we can always pick and choose and come up with different definitions. We'll always be shifting. There's no standard. So my prayer is that a Christian ethos, influence, and truth will penetrate these areas so that we can have more stability, more flourishing, more goodness in our cultures. Because frankly, right now, what we're seeing in Canada, the United States, the West in particular, is the wheels coming off. It's like we've done a giant experiment. We've done a giant experiment with everybody's livelihoods and lives, and it's not working. It's not working. So what was working before, and I think that's one of the reasons why there's an attack on our history. There's an intentional attack on our history, our values. That's why you see statues being toppled. It's not just a rare incident. It's not an accident. This is by design. And I'm convinced that people want us to only know today, to not have any historical roots, because people that without historical roots are much easier to control. That's if you read books like 1984 or dystopian novels. If you look at the history of communist movements, communist countries, this is part and parcel of what they have tried to do. So we as Christians need to be savvy to that and prepare accordingly.
Yeah, thank you. And do you think there should be a Christian Heritage Month? Like we see like some other religious groups, they are celebrating their month. So do you think there should be one for Christian, especially maybe in December, where Christian, like not only Christian but many other groups celebrate Christmas too?
Yeah, well, here's where I would land. Anytime anything that celebrates and champions Christ in the culture, I'm for it. So if somebody wanted to designate a month, I'm for it. I would be content designated June as Christian Heritage Month, because I feel like this Pride Month, this nonsense, the calendar, like I said, the calendar that was changed so that Easter was having to share attention with this obscure little LGBT holiday, that was absolutely wild. And actually, I think that maybe we need a war on the calendar, because it's like they've taken over the calendar culturally and they've inserted, like, I don't know why you need a Pride Month. It's their holidays are scattered, which nobody created. I don't remember any of this. They just had a group come in and invent all of these false holidays. They're not holy days. They're just false days. And they've been littered across the calendar. And I do think that needs to be rejected. I do think that needs to be pushed against. In fact, there's all these little tweaks that have been inserted into our cultures, and I think they need to be confronted and utterly rejected by Christians. Some of them seem small and insignificant, but like when you're reading books, we used to use the term when we're talking about years, AD or BC. Well, now they're saying instead of AD, they'll say CE for Common Era or BCE. I'm for casting all of that trash out. We just need to stand for what we're believing in, and can't be led around by the nose by people that unfortunately hate us, hate our values, hate our God. So I'm just an advocate, a champion of seeing that end.
Yeah, thank you. So, but before we saw like this Pride Month LGBT group, they were completely united. But now I see like they are just like keeping themselves distinguished. Like there is just a group which say we should be called just LGBT. There is other group like LGBTQ2 plus,
Yeah.
like some those, but it means they are fighting with each other just recently. So do you have a thought on that one, how it will go? Maybe we won't see what you are saying. This Pride Month should be removed from the calendar. So, do you think it will go for a long, or just this is for a short term, and we don't see anything such thing like this in near future?
Well, like I said, it's Christ or chaos. And I think what we're seeing right now is way too much chaos. I think in that you have this whole intersectionality argument. You have these groups that are championing, again, all these things that are unbiblical. And they're really foisting it upon ourselves. Originally, it was, oh, you just need to tolerate us and all will go well. Well, it wasn't that. It was really forced. It was coercion. You won't just recognize us. You won't just allow us to get married or something like this. No, you have to approve. You will approve. It's a very coercive, like I said, an authoritarian streak in that.
Mhm.
And I do think that there's skirmishes that are playing out. So, for example, you will see some that would describe themselves as lesbians
Mhm.
speaking up for. I mean, how absurd are the conversations we're having to have? You'll have some lesbians that are speaking up and saying, "Hey, uh, maybe we should leave girls' sports alone and just let girls play
Mhm.
in girls' sports." But then you have the T part of that equation, the trans community that's saying, "Oh no, because they are girls," and the lesbians are like with J.K. Rowling, she's like, she's not a lesbian, but she's sympathetic to gay rights, but she's coming out and saying no. There should be exclusively women's spaces, and so there is some infighting. I don't know how extensive that gets, but what I see with the plus sign and everything else, what I see evidence of is a perpetual revolution. I feel like in their philosophy of life in the world, uh, they are always having to. There's always revolution. They are always trying to cast down, and you see this in again also in communist movements, those that were on the front leading edge of some of those actions, some of those revolutions. Later, they're being pilloried. Later, they're being hauled down and attacked and marginalized. It's a perpetual revolution because it's based off no standards. It's no standards except for what the powerful say, and it just devolves to power. Whoever's in position can dictate the terms, and they're going to control the narrative, and there's no standard. There's no standard outside of them. And so if there's nothing above this state, if there's nothing above these powerful actors, in their eyes, they are God. If they're not accountable to anyone, it's them. And I think you see that. I think that's truly how they view the world, how they're living things, and how they're trying to force other people to comply with their will.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. So, do you think will we get back to normal?
Well, I am hopeful. I might be rare. Maybe there's not a lot like me,
Mhm.
but I am looking more from a long-term framework.
Mhm.
I'm not in this for the short game. I don't think that this is going to be fixed in the next election cycle. I
Mhm.
don't think this is going to be fixed in the coming years. But if I charted out a few decades, if I charted out a few centuries, I think that historians may look back on this time as a low watermark for
Mhm.
society. But my prayer is that with those wheels falling off, they're it's collapsing around us in real time, and something is going to rebuild out of the ashes of this heap. And what I am committed to is making sure that people clearly understand the gospel, that Jesus really was a man. He really was the God man. He died on the cross. He was buried. He rose again on the third day in accordance with the scriptures. He conquered death. He redeemed our status with God, and he's reconciled us, and he's given us a future hope and eternal life. And I pray that people hear that, know that, and even as they look back on history, when things were going better, they're going to recognize that it was built on that foundation, that truth, that bedrock, and that stands. This stuff doesn't. This will flitter away. This is chaff that will be blown away. But my prayer is that people recover that. And maybe if they have never heard of that before, maybe they've never been prompted to hear that or be challenged by it, my prayer is that they would do so today. That they would wrestle with the gospel and know that it really is true. and that we can lean into that. And we have a confidence that comes from that. Um, Philippians 1:21 says, for to me, to live is Christ and to die is gain. So if I'm living in this life, praise God, I'm going to advance Christ. If something happens to me, like maybe it's risky coming out and having conversations like this, maybe it's risky to stand up on behalf of fellow Christians, and even if it's not popular and it costs me some social standing, well, so be it. That's Christ. And if the worst that happens to me is that something terrible happens and I lose my life, well, I still know I'm with Christ. We need that kind of confidence, and it just speaks into all of our lives. So will we get back to normal? My prayer is that we get back to better than normal. I pray that we advance the kingdom and that peoples will be redeemed. I pray that lives and communities would be transformed. I pray that goodness and mercy would reign.
Thank you. So my last question. So as you are working in Middle East and like in West Africa, so where the majority are like Muslim or Muslim majority are ruling there. So do you think will near future, so will they accept like Christianity? Will they treat them fairly, equally?
I think that's going to be a big challenge in the midterm. Maybe long term, I do think that will happen. Midterm, short term, there's a lot of challenges there. Like Nigeria, recently got back from Nigeria and the Middle Belt region, and there's just extensive Christian communities that are being overwhelmed to staggering degrees by Islamist radicals, and it's horrible to watch. And it doesn't get a lot of attention or coverage. But it's very grave there. But I do think as Christians, we need to examine this. Just like I said when we were talking about the churches in Canada, even if the world doesn't care about the churches burning in Canada, you better believe the global church better care. And if governments aren't going to do anything for them, well, we need as Christians to stand up for one another. So I think there have to be serious conversations on that. I think, sometimes there's a real pietistic streak, and I think we need to know that being a Christian doesn't mean being a doormat. It's okay to stand up. Even if you don't feel like you want to stand up for your rights, then stand up for your neighbor's rights. Stand up. And we're called as Christians, we have a unique obligation to fellow Christians. Speak up for them. Let's figure out, we have so many resources in the global church. We have successful businessmen. We have great thinkers and academics and professors. We have great teachers. We have so many resources, but we need to start coming together and trying to work through ways that we can be an increased blessing to those that are under fire in communities like those. We're covering at the Christian Emergency Alliance. People can follow our Twitter feed or anything like that. They're going to see these accounts coming out of Egypt, Nigeria, Canada, Germany, China. We got problems across the board, but we also have opportunities across the board. And again, we cannot allow ourselves to cave to hatred. We have to be prayerful. We have to pray for our enemies. We have to pray for those that hate us. We have to be willing to share the gospel, even if people might laugh at us or hurl insults at us. And we need to be able to disciple our younger generations. We need to be able to disciple those who may not be young. Maybe they're 60 years old, 70 years old, and this is the first time that they've heard the gospel. Let's disciple them too. We're in this together. There's actually a lot of joy and fellowship that comes from that, even if days are dark. But we have so many around us, and there's just so many opportunities to be a blessing in these hurting times.
Okay, thank you. And do you have a last message to Christian and Christianity community?
Yeah, my parting message today to the Christian community, if you're in Canada, if you're in Nigeria, United States, anywhere in the world, is that you're not alone. You are loved. You're not forgotten. You're not cut off. And in fact, you have a special purpose. You have a special mission. And I pray that you can connect with a biblically rooted church that's not just trying to entertain you. And if that requires you to be intentional, do some research and find a good church like that, I pray that you would do so. But we're in this together, and things may look bleak, but I'm confident that God is doing something amazing through this. And here's where I'll end. Again, we need to know our history a little bit better. When the communists took over China, 1949, 1950, most of the foreign missionaries, Christian missionaries that were working, they were all kicked out. And there weren't very many Chinese Christians there. And it looked like the end of the world in China. It looked like the end of days for the Christian faith in China. But what happened? God moved. And whereas there was a few thousand Chinese Christians, well, now there's some estimates that there's 100 million Chinese Christians faithfully who lived under that difficult environment. You go to Iran, 1979, the Islamic Revolution. It looked like the end of days for the small Christian community in Iran. Maybe there were 500 Iranian believers at the time. Today, it's probably the fastest growing church in the world. It's probably got north of 1 million believers. That's a move of God. So even in dark days, God is doing something. And I'm convinced that he's doing something right now in your own community. And you just need to pray, turn to him, and seek to be used by him for his good purposes. So we're in this together. It's a joy to serve alongside all of you. And for anybody that's just hearing a Christian message for the first time, we would love to hear from you. You can reach out to us at the Christian Emergency Alliance. You can reach me, and we'd be happy just to answer any questions you have and walk alongside you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Coleman, to joining me today and sharing your thoughts. It was a great chat with you.
Well, thank you, Sami, for having me on. God bless you, and I pray you the very best in your efforts. Thank you for stepping out and shining a light on this topic that not a lot of people are talking about.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you. And I always try to and it means I always try to raise my voice, but with respect to burning of churches, those just like make me very sad. Like maybe that is your like a religion, but it is not. Though it is not my religion, but still I feel
Yeah.
very bad about this thing. And
Yeah.
I also written some blog, like two of those blog were published on my store. Like there is a blog, Sami Substack. So I published them there regarding this. So one was regarding Trudeau government, like is leadership. It means showing double standard. It means treating
Yeah.
others group differently than Christianity. It seems like he had just Christians, and the other was just he did not send a message on last Good Friday, and he missed it, and he did not say anything. And I also noticed he did not condemn the burning of churches, as you said. He said it is understandable, like what you are doing.
Yeah.
It is shocking for me. Really, I'm very feel sad when I see the pictures, those
Yeah.
whatever, yeah, those are history, those are part of our life. And it
Yeah.
means, yeah, so the cancel culture, though there are people who said, oh, you don't say like Merry Christmas. This make me sad. I I with
Yeah.
my intention to make them angry, I will say, oh, Merry Christmas.
Yeah. And that's what I would say. I would say just own it. I'm going to say Merry Christmas. If I'm writing an essay or something, I'm going to put AD, BC in there. I'm not going to, yeah, I think we just have to be willing to not be pushed over. I think we've been too nice for too long.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much again, sir. Thank you so much. It's it is, as you said, it's your honor. It is my honor, sir. Everywhere.
Well, I appreciate it, man. I'm going to have to bounce, but I hope you have a great afternoon.
Yeah,
All right, bless you.
yeah.
Bye-bye.
You take care. Bless God bless you.